Everybody, thank you for joining us today. As you can tell, I'm not in Seattle, I'm in Hawaii. And you might hear a rooster crow from time to time, so I apologize for his interruptions. Please feel free if you have questions to ask them through the chat during the deposition. And if I can get to them right then, I would like to do that. Otherwise, we'll save them for the end. I first did a PowerPoint presentation for the WSAJ in 1990, I think it was 7 or 8, probably 1998, when my partner then, Pat LaPlay, was supposed to do a seminar on depositions. He couldn't do it and asked me to. And I thought, I want to do a PowerPoint. 1997, think about it. It took me 8 hours to do it. I did it by myself. It was horrible. If you go back and look at it today, I had bombs blowing off, and I was so enchanted with all the little features of PowerPoint, and it was a terrible thing, but I've used it ever since, and I've learned the hard way, the do's and don'ts of how to do PowerPoint. One of the most important people to me in PowerPoint was Cliff Atkinson, and he wrote the book Beyond Bullets, and he did some big trials with Mark Lanier, and they were just so imaginative and interesting. And I talked to him way back then in the early 2000s about PowerPoint and what would it cost. And it was like putting on a movie. There was no way I was going to spend that much money to do PowerPoint. I do it mainly by myself. I take things and I put them together. It's kind of a homegrown, homespun type of a way, which in my opinion works well with juries versus a super slick production. This is just much more human. So I'm going to begin, and I have a lot of PowerPoints to go through today, but really to go through some basic don'ts. The problem with the don'ts, and here's you can see my screen and how I've kind of organized it for today. The PowerPoint don'ts, I've been talking about this for so long. I'm going to keep it on I'm going to keep this so that you can see me and you can see what's coming up next. You can see my version of it versus a whole screen. I think it's more engaging to show all this going on. A lot of this hasn't changed, and people still are not listening to me. And it's not just me. This is stuff I pulled from Cliff Atkinson. And then there was a professor from Yale who wrote a book called, I can't remember, something PowerPoint, Better PowerPoint or something like that, which talked about how it was created, but without any kind of research, and how visual learning is very specific. And PowerPoint PowerPoint users would be wise to read some of these articles or learn something about visual learning, how people learn, because isn't that what PowerPoint is for? I think it's for a couple of different uses, but for the trial lawyer, for the lawyer that wants to put on a deposition, for a trial lawyer that wants to speak or engage any kind of audience, the purpose is to learn and to persuade in our case, but also to teach, to persuade. That's what the trial lawyer does. So overall rule number 1, in my opinion, is if you're doing the PowerPoint so that you can have an outline in the PowerPoint, so you can say that you don't use notes, but you use a PowerPoint for your notes, then you're doing it wrong. If you are reading from your PowerPoint almost ever, you're doing it wrong. If you are using it to basically put all the words in order so that you can tell the story by just reading it, that's not the right way to do it. It's not persuasive. And according to the research, it's actually worse than not using a PowerPoint at all, because the person is trying to listen to you and look at the same time, and the retention goes way down. Still, people persist in using bullet points, outline formats, and it's because we see a lot of it. We see a lot of bad PowerPoints. So Jay Flynn, wonderful lawyer from Eastern Washington, did a whole group of these visuals for me when I helped teach or put together class to teach speakers for WSAJ gosh, it had to be 10 years ago. There's a booklet with all of his stuff in it. If you ask WSAJ, they have it. It was tips for speakers. And here's he just came up with these lovely visuals for how horrible PowerPoint can be. One of the worst things that you can do is use a preformed template. It's just terrible. Don't use any of the preformed templates by PowerPoint. It should be the blank slide always.
Karen, sorry to interrupt, but the PowerPoint actually is not displayed. We just see the folder with the PowerPoints in it.
Oh, it moved over. I am so sorry. I should have noticed that. It moved over when I opened it. Okay, wait, I'll show you guys Jay's beautiful, see, there it is. There's Jay's, one of Jay's beautiful cartoons. So don't use the PowerPoint templates. One of the reasons is because when people are visually learning, each visual item that you put down there has to be absorbed and figured out. And visual overload will happen when there's too much stuff. So here we have a template, we have words, we have a logo, and we have an icon. That's 4 different groups of information. The optimum should be about 2 or 3 per slide. This is how we see PowerPoints used all the time, especially at conventions. I'm just calling it like I see it. I've done this stuff. I've done bad things too. And so I'm learning by like I said, trial and error. So here is what, and this is what I've gleaned from Cliff Atkinson and the other professor. Just a few chunks of data per slide. Take out everything else. And then, I used to love to animate everything, and I don't think I have the animations in there, but you know, bombs and words coming in one at a time. Don't do that. Clip art, cute things, just putting documents up. This is what you see a lot of. The photograph, some kind of a heading, and some data. Lawyers love data. But data is not persuasive just like that. What's persuasive is to tell a story. And you can do that by just using the photo and using your voice as a story. Or a lot of times, and I'll show you some examples, you can tell the story just using the photograph and the headline. And the headline should be a sentence, not a bunch of independent words struck together, because people don't learn in chunks like this. We talk in sentences. That's what hits us. That's what we understand. That's what goes inside. So it's not just a data transfer. If trial or deposition or motion or everything, life was a data transfer, then we could just take our files and stick them into people's heads. But we need to persuade and teach. So that's the purpose of PowerPoint. This is my favorite slide of Jay's, because we tend to do that. I've done that, where you're talking to the slide with the jurors behind you. When you go back in a trial, you'll really feel this again. I personally, when I use PowerPoint, I use a monitor, which is my little computer. That's put down on a separate little stand below the jury bench, or in the case of trial, so I can see it, I can glance at it, I can also glance it to the side. And then the screen is normally behind me, and I never have to turn around unless I want to go and purposefully point at something. Well, those are some of the don'ts of PowerPoint.